What a glorious, glorious Sunday day we have. We thank God for the great gift of this beautiful weather and hope you all have had a wonderful MEA week, especially those of you with children. This past Saturday, just yesterday, Holy Mother Church celebrated the feast day of St. John Paul the Great, one of the great popes of our church and one of the truly outstanding figures of the 20th century. I was named after John Paul the Great, and so it's a special day of celebration for me. I was named really by my sister Molly, who is now Sister Maria Grace, the little sister of the poor in France. I've been told that shortly before my birth, the Erickson clan was gathered at the local Steak and Shake, and my parents were asking their kids, what should we name this newest baby that is in mom's tummy? And after some discussion, my little sister, at the time she was little, she's older than me, but little Molly said we should name him after the Pope. JP2 had recently been elected, quite surprisingly, and Molly thought it'd be a good idea to name this Irish Norwegian after this newest Polish Pope, and so I was. And I'm very grateful to my sister Molly for that inspiration. I went for most of my life up until college as really JP, not John Paul, but JP. In St. Mark's, when I was going through grade school, there was another John Nentel and John Erickson. And as a way to distinguish, I was JP, John was John. And I thought JP was a pretty great name. Great name, huh? And I never really thought too much about the fact that it was named after the Pope. Came from a very Catholic family, but okay, some white dude in Rome, I'm named after him, so what? But shortly before I went to college out in California, I had the chance to stop by the offices of Ignatius Press. This is a publishing house, produces a lot of wonderful books right there in San Francisco. And I had a chance to speak with one of the workers there, and she said to me, John Paul, or John, or JP, you are named after one of the greatest figures of all of the 20th century and one of the truly outstanding popes of our church's life. You got to be proud of that name. So you go by John Paul here on out. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I have. Ever since that conversation in San Francisco with that dear employee of Ignatius Press, I've gone by John Paul Erickson. John Paul, quite deliberately so. I'm very proud of that name, very proud of my association with this great figure. And I'd like to offer to you all that you too should be proud. You too should be proud of your Catholic faith. Of your Catholic faith. You should be proud of it. This can sometimes be a challenge for us. We hear the criticism leveled against the Roman Catholic Church, and perhaps even in our lives, and perhaps in our families' lives, from the mouths of colleagues or friends or neighbors. We can experience maybe some embarrassment even. Gosh, do I really want to be known as a Jesus freak, as a Roman Catholic? I know how important this is for me and for my life, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable because of these criticisms that are leveled against the church. And I'd like to respond to some of those criticisms that maybe you have in your own mind, or maybe you've heard from family and friends, and try to encourage you to be bold and to be clear about your Catholic faith, your Roman Catholic faith. And then I'd like to try to connect that pride to the message of humility in the gospel. My brothers and sisters, one of the criticisms leveled against the Catholic Church, of course, is the abuse scandal, or handling of the abuse scandal. And I want to be very, very clear that any one single case of abuse of a child, of the robbing of their innocence, is a horror for which we as members of the church, and especially, of course, those responsible, must do penance and must serve justice. Any case is one too many. And it is a good thing, I repeat, a good thing, that the handling of abuse cases has been brought to light. And we pray that God's light and God's grace and God's healing may continue to infiltrate those parts of the church's life and those members of the church that have betrayed their vows and have betrayed the people of God and children. But my brothers and sisters, let's also be very clear that the church herself and the members of the church is not the only institution to have endured and to have allowed this great horror. In fact, the number one perpetrator of abuse are family members. family members, loved ones, those who are known. And yet, we would never say that family life in general is to be abolished, that family life itself is to be looked at with great skepticism. We think about the cases of betrayal and abuse within the teacher community, public teachers or other institutions, and how vociferously and how strongly unions have protested the shining of light upon these cases and the publication of data about the widespread fact of this awful, awful truth. Now, I don't say this to say we're just as bad as everybody else. That's not my point. My point is that to specifically point out the Catholic Church as somehow an exception to this challenging situation, this horror, this terror, is wrong. Yes, it takes place within the walls of the church because we are comprised of human beings. Not first and foremost because of the way the institution is devised. I don't believe that. I believe it comes first of all because human beings are broken, and sin is always a possibility for all of us. So the church is not unique in this struggle, not unique. And I would say in the last number of years, the church has done a tremendous amount to secure the safety of children. Can more be done? Of course, always. Is this safety true throughout the Catholic Church, throughout the globe? No. But I do believe that here in the U.S. we have made tremendous strides for which we should be proud, even as we continue to make amends for the tears that have been inflicted. What about the case that, or the accusation rather, that the church is affiliated with wars and torture, forced conversions? Well, my brothers and sisters, let's also be clear that the church, yes, at times has associated itself and even called for armed conflict. It is the case. We think about the Crusades. But what we don't oftentimes hear is that in virtually all of the cases, I admit I am not a student of history, but certainly a lover of the church, those crusades specifically have been defensive wars to take back land that was taken from Christians. A defensive war. That the rights of those who are being persecuted by foreign invaders, that is what the church has protested and called faithful Christians to rise up against. And it's the case, too, that just like any other institution, members of the church, including those who wear hats and collars, have done bad things in the name of the great, awesome ideal of the church herself. Even if one doesn't accept the truth of the faith, I think one can see that the ideals of the church could be a very good thing. And we know that there are many instances where good, wonderful ideas like democracy is used as an excuse for war. The spreading of democracy, the defense of democracy. That's not a critique against recent decisions of administrations. It's not. What I'm saying is that the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church and the struggles to account for bad decisions and bad motivations of her members, again, we are not unique in this. Any idea can be used for bad ends. Any idea. The church is not alone in this. But we also have to, again, stand fast in the fact that, well, let's look at the facts about some of these conflicts, some of these wars. Let's look at the great boogeyman of the Spanish Inquisition. Let's actually look at the facts. And that, yes, of course, abuses took place. But it's also the case that the church was attempting to deal with a profound struggle with doctrinal and dogmatic confusion. And there must be clarity about what we believe, not only for the sake of the church, but also even for political institutions themselves. What about the very fact of hypocritical leaders, whether they are bishops or laity? We know, of course, that there are many within the church, even in positions of leadership, that do not live up to their promises and their vows, including their baptismal promises. We know that. And it can be very disheartening when shepherds, especially shepherds whom we've really grown attached to. You know, a number of years ago, there was a very prominent preacher on EWTN who, through a series of bizarre, strange scandals, suddenly disappeared from the world of Catholic programming. Strange situation, strange. And many people were very jarred by that because they'd hitched their wagon to Father Carapi. And yet now it's, did I was I misled by this man? What am I to think of this? Well, again, let's be very clear that Jesus Christ in the upper room never promises that the shepherds of the church will always be pristine or even holy. He wants them to be holy. He wants us to be holy. But in the upper room itself, we've got 11 men who betray Jesus. These are the very fellows that Jesus chooses to be his first bishops. And 11 of them out of 12 abandon him in his moment of greatest need. Jesus knows that the men that he chooses for the priesthood and for the episcopacy are frail. And we should acknowledge that too, in case you didn't know. Now, praise Almighty God that the validity of the sacraments and even the compelling nature of a homily does not depend upon the state of grace of the man, the celebrant. Praise Almighty God. The church believes that the sacraments depend upon the holiness of the priest Jesus Christ. And that's why that regardless of whether or who you go to for confession, regardless of what mass you attend, who the celebrant may be, Jesus is at work. And many a preacher can preach from a pulpit that his own life is in great disarray. Let me tell you. But the words can still be compelling and true, because Jesus is faithful, because Jesus is true. We find our consolation and our peace in him, not in our leaders. Finally, I promise you finally, what about the accusation of colonialism? The church has come in and forced herself upon ethnicities and upon cultures that were very good in and of themselves. Well, first of all, I just want to say that the idea of the noble savage, the idea that there have been groups of people in the world prior to the coming of Christ that simply were living in pristine holiness of life before the big bad Christian missionary came, is a great error. It's a complete misunderstanding of history. Just like the West itself, in all cultures throughout the history of the world, there has been brokenness, there has been frailty, there's been barbarism. And we can't simply say, we can't accept the accusation, the gross mischaracterization that these civilizations that the church encountered had the fullness of virtue and peace because they simply didn't. Did you know that the Hmong, I think I've shared this before, the Hmong have a written language because of Christian missionaries. This is why the Hmong, when you see Hmong on a side of a shop, you'll see Roman letters rather than Asian figures, because they got the written language very recently from Christian missionaries. Do you like human rights? Do you like the fact that all human beings are equal? That comes from the church. Because the church teaches that all people are destined for salvation. Jesus Christ has come to save all people. And this is, I would like to offer, unique in the history of the world. This comes from us. This comes from the church. The Jews didn't believe it. They believed in a difference between Jews and Gentiles. Other civilizations before the coming of Christ did not accept it. There was caste systems, differences of people, differences between men and women, in dignity and rights. The church doesn't accept this. The Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Is that self-evident? I don't think it is. But the church does, because she has listened to the voice of God and she proclaims this message to the people that she encounters. And finally, the proclamation of Jesus himself to those people that the church has come as missionaries. A profound, awesome, greatest of goods. You now know the meaning of life. You know now the meaning of your own existence. You now have a means to offer up your sufferings for the salvation of souls. You're inserted into a great family from which you can draw inspiration and prayer. This is what the church proclaims as she proclaims the gospel to peoples and to nations. We should be proud of our church. We should be proud of the fact that the church has the fullness of revelation. The Catholic Church has everything that God has revealed to humanity. We have it in the Bible and in tradition, as explained and enunciated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. You don't need to accept any private revelations. You can, but we've got all that we need in the tradition of the church. Everything we need that God has revealed, we have. The rights of the poor, the rights of the unborn, the rights of the marginalized. This is the message of the church, because Jesus preached the rights of the poor and the marginalized, those in the outskirts. We follow the message and the example of the Messiah, who had a special love for the poor, and so do we. So does the church, and we should be proud of that. The rights and dignity of women, I say it again, the rights and dignity of women. That is also a hallmark and grace of the church, Yes, I say it again, of the church. Who is the greatest saint in the entire litany of saints? The Mother of God, whose greatness is not found in power. What can you do? What can you do? There's this tremendous confusion about why priests are so important in the church. It's not because we got power. It's not because we have power. It's because of the choice of Jesus to act in and through weak, broken human beings to manifest his mercy and love to his people through the sacraments. We are channels of grace of the sacraments. That's where we find our meaning. And women too, dignity and grace and power and genius. And the church affirms this. No matter what you may read, the church affirms this. What about the church's clear teaching on matters of sexual morality? This could also probably be listed in sort of the criticisms that are leveled against the church. But you know, when Humanae Vitae came out, 50 years ago, whatever it was, Paul VI said in that document, which reaffirmed the church's position that artificial contraception is not lawful, he said that should this be allowed in a widespread way, there would be a proliferation of divorce and a proliferation of struggles with impurity, proliferation of images that are bad for all human beings, but especially for children and for young people. Well, I can tell you, in a post-Humanae Vitae world, in a world in which artificial contraception is widely accepted as a human right, the number one struggle in that confessional is struggles with online impurity. Number one. Certainly for fellas, and increasingly so for ladies. I believe there's a direct connection between ripping apart the unitive and the procreative ends of the human act of intimacy, which is where the church finds her foundation in all of her teachings about sexual matters. Human intimacy is radically connected to the conception of children and family life. Everything flows from that, everything. And the church has been clear about this, and she will always be clear about this because it is revealed by God in nature and through grace. So, if we should be proud, how does that comport with the gospel, which is all about humility? Well, humility is the honest, clear expression and acceptance of the truth, And the truth is that we are sinners like the tax collector. And what is more, we have received our faith as a gift. We're not Catholic, first of all, because we reached out and grabbed it. Even those of you who are converts, it was a movement of grace. A movement of grace. You are a member of this household of God because of God's free choice. Most of us were baptized as babies, and we probably even protested our baptism as we squirmed around and cried. But God has chosen us to be members of this family, so we need to embrace that and be bold about that. Our faith is a beautiful, powerful thing with all the instruments that we need to be holy. By the way, this is also one of the consequences of being Catholic. We got no excuses. We have no excuses. We have everything that we need to be holy, everything. We're held to a higher standard than those who are outside of the Catholic Church. We're held to a higher standard. So my brothers and sisters, on this Sunday, as we confront the realities of evil in the world and of our struggles in our families. Let's hold fast to the great beauty and truth of our Catholic faith, which is an awesome thing, an awesome thing. Is it always expressed clearly? Are Christians always the best witnesses of the truth of the faith? No, we are not. No, we are not. But we should take great pride in our names, so many of you named after great saints. We should take pride in our traditions and in our heritage. We should cling to the sacraments of our mother, the church, who is holy even when her children are certainly not. Let us be proud to be Catholic. Let us live it well, because the world needs the Catholic Church. The world needs the Catholic Church, because the world needs Jesus.